What if everything we believed about Roman ancestry, the proud bloodline of emperors, legions, and Latin glorium, was genetically false? We've been told a myth, a grand one, that Rome, the greatest empire the world had ever seen, was born from a singular people, one race, one origin, one proud lineage that shaped the known world. But that myth collapses the moment you test the bones. In 2019, a landmark study published in Science, Antonio et al., analyzed 127 ancient genomes from archaeological sites in and around Rome, spanning over 12,000 years. This wasn't just a genetic snapshot. It was a full cinematic reel of Roman ancestry, frame by frame. And the first frame, it shattered everything. The early Romans, those who lived centuries before Caesar, before the Republic, were already a blend. Their DNA was not pure Italic, it was a mix, a vibrant fusion of three powerful ancestral forces. First came the Neolithic farmers from Anatolia, arriving around 6000 BCE. They brought agriculture, and with it, a wave of early European farmer, EEF ancestry, that nearly replaced Italy's native hunter-gatherers. Then around 2500 BCE, another shockwave hit, the steppe herders from the east, likely linked to the Yamnaya culture, carrying Indo-European language roots and introducing the powerful R1b M269 haplogroup, a male lineage that would shape much of Europe. And even earlier still, the land was home to Western hunter-gatherers, WHG, the invisible ancestry embedded deep in the genome, with roots stretching back to the Mesolithic period, as shown by DNA from Grotta Continenza. By the time Rome was founded in 753 BCE, the people of Latium weren't a pure tribe. They were a mosaic. Their DNA already resembled modern Mediterranean populations far more than a uniform Italic group. It wasn't a nation of Italians. It was a nation of everyone. Rome didn't start as an empire. It started as a crossroads, where Anatolian farmers, steppe warriors, and local tribes intermingled long before the first emperor ever drew breath. So the genetic blueprint of Rome wasn't Latin. It was layered. And if the foundation of Roman identity was already so diverse, so borrowed, so mixed, what does that say about the next great mystery? But if Romans weren't born Romans, who were the people who gave Rome its first identity? To find that answer, we have to turn to a people older than Rome itself, a vanished civilization that still whispers from Italy's hills and tombs. They ruled before the Romans, spoke a language no one could decipher, and carried a DNA profile that stunned scientists. They built cities before the Republic, raised temples before Jupiter had a Roman name. And yet the Etruscans, Rome's mysterious neighbors, have always felt like a glitch in the ancient code. Their language? A linguistic orphan, not Indo-European, not Greek, not Latin. Their origins? Long blamed on Herodotus's tale, that they sailed from Lydia in Anatolia, refugees of famine, settling in central Italy. But science finally broke the silence. Between 2021 and 2024, archaeogeneticists dug deep into Etruscan necropolises like Tarquinia and Poggio Renzo, unlocking DNA from skeletons buried between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE. And what they found destroyed the Eastern myth entirely. The Etruscans were not foreign. Their DNA showed over 84% Bell Beaker ancestry, a European marker tied to Central and Western migration flows. Their Y-DNA was 75% R1b M269, the same dominant haplogroup found in Italic and Celtic tribes. Their maternal lines, mtDNA, H and U, linked them to the same ancient farmer and steppe threads that ran through early Latium. In other words, they were locals, indigenous, rooted in Italy long before any Roman legend was carved in stone. But here's the twist. Genetically, they were nearly identical to their Latin neighbors. Yet culturally, they were worlds apart. Different gods, different rituals, and a language so unique that even today scholars can only decipher fragments. A society that thrived in parallel with the early republic, and then vanished. But they didn't vanish completely, because even though their cities crumbled, their DNA did not. Studies in modern rural Tuscany show Etruscan genetic continuity, especially in isolated regions like Casentino and Chiusi, where ancient bloodlines echo across centuries. And still one question lingers. How did a people so powerful, so distinct, simply disappear? But soon Rome would absorb these peoples, and then welcome a wave that would make even the Etruscans look like locals. And that wave didn't just reshape Rome, it rewrote its entire identity, not gradually, not subtly, but like a genetic earthquake that changed the face of the capital forever. By the height of the empire, Rome wasn't ruled by Italians. It was filled with Syrians, Greeks, Anatolians, even Africans. This is where the myth breaks. We imagine imperial Rome as a proud capital of Italians, men in togas shouting in Latin, ruling over a world they carved with their own hands. But the truth is a plot twist even history wasn't ready for. Because by the time Rome reached its golden peak, between 200 BCE and 300 CE, it wasn't a city of Italians anymore. It had become a genetic capital of the Mediterranean world. The empire didn't just conquer provinces, it became them. In 2019, a revolutionary genome study published in Science, Antonio et al., analyzed 48 individuals buried in Roman cemeteries. Their ancestry, only 28% traced back to early Italic roots. The majority, yes, the majority, came from the Eastern Mediterranean, Anatolia, the Levant, and North Africa. This wasn't migration, this was metamorphosis. By the 1st century CE, Rome had become the ultimate crossroads, fueled by trade, slavery, diplomacy, and war. Merchants from Syria, soldiers from Thrace, scribes from Judea, all walking the same streets, all becoming Roman, not by blood but by citizenship, especially after Caracalla's 212 CE edict, which granted citizenship to every free man across the empire. It wasn't included, it was absorption. And then came Pompeii, buried in 79 CE by Vesuvius, frozen in time. In 2024, geneticists analyzed remains from the House of the Golden Bracelet, and the results were explosive. These weren't local aristocrats. Their DNA carried signatures from Levantine and North African populations. Right there in the heart of Italy stood a family whose bloodlines reached deep into the eastern deserts and across African coasts. Rome hadn't just opened its gates, it had imported its identity. The city's DNA became a mirror of its empire, fractured, diverse, beautiful, complicated. So what happens when the empire holding that identity together falls? But could this genetic empire survive its own collapse? Because when Rome finally fell, it didn't just crumble in stone, it cracked in blood. And what poured in reshaped everything the empire had once united. The fall of the empire didn't just reshape borders, it shattered genomes across Europe. In the chaos that followed Rome's collapse, the noise wasn't just political, it was genetic. What had been one of the most culturally and genetically interconnected capitals in the ancient world was suddenly torn apart by war, famine, and waves of foreign migration. Starting in the 4th century CE, the Western Roman Empire began to break at the seams. Borders collapsed, armies dissolved, power shifted, and with it came the Goths, the Lombards, and the Slavs, tribes from the north and east, armed not just with steel but with new bloodlines. This wasn't just a cultural takeover. It was a genomic reset. In central Italy, the once dominant R1b haplogroup, the The same paternal lineage that had defined early Rome and echoed through the Republican Empire began to plummet from 75% to around 40%. Meanwhile, haplogroups J and E, commonly associated with Eastern Mediterranean and Near Eastern ancestries, began to rise, as did traces of Germanic Y DNA, especially linked to Lombard invasions post-568 CE. A major study led by Cosimo Post in 2021, analyzing genomes across Italy and Central Europe, revealed that by 1000 CE, the modern genetic blueprint of Central and Southern Italians had largely stabilized. It was no longer purely Italic, nor purely Eastern. It had become a fusion, a biological echo of centuries of migration, war, and adaptation. Even steppe ancestry, once amplified by Indo-European waves during the Bronze Age, had declined significantly, diluted by new DNA streams from both the Germanic North and the Mediterranean East. So yes, the empire was gone, but in the bones of the survivors, the farmers of Umbria, the fishermen of Naples, the shepherds in the Apennines, Rome had left a ghost, not in monuments, but in molecules. Still, that was the heart of the empire. What about the edges, the far-flung provinces, Gaul, Iberia, Britain? But did the provinces, far from the eternal city, carry any Roman blood at all? The empire shattered. Its center collapsed. But what about the edges, the provinces built by Roman hands, spoken in Roman tongues, stamped with Roman law? Did the blood of Rome echo there? Or had its DNA already vanished before the dust even settled? Latin spread like wildfire, but Roman DNA didn't. For centuries, we imagined the Roman Empire like a massive machine, steamrolling across Europe, seeding Roman identity everywhere it went. But the genetic reality, it's not what you'd think. In Britain, Rome ruled for nearly 400 years. Legions marched, towns were built, Latin became law. But when geneticists examined ancient British remains from Roman-era cemeteries, they found a surprise: almost no Italic DNA. Instead, the dominant genes belonged to the local Celtic populations and later Scandinavian and Germanic tribes brought by Anglo-Saxon invasions. Rome had left behind coins and roads, but not chromosomes. In the Balkans, where the empire had garrisons from Dalmatia to Moesia, the story should have been different. But the genetic signature again defied the map. Ancient genomes revealed a massive influx from Anatolia, not Rome, and by the 6th and 7th centuries CE, the region was reshaped by waves of Slavic migrations, which today account for 30 to 60% of the modern Balkan gene pool. Even in Iberia, where Roman culture lasted the longest, the DNA trail is blurred. You'd expect Italic genes embedded deep into Spanish and Portuguese bloodlines, but what geneticists actually found was something else: rising contributions from North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, linked more to Phoenician and later Moorish influences than to Rome itself. This creates a scientific riddle. Rome exported law, architecture, religion, even identity, but not its blood. The culture spread like wildfire. But the genes? They stayed closer to home. The empire built walls and aqueducts thousands of miles away but didn't leave its DNA behind. So where did it go? Where did the blood of the legions, the consuls, the slaves, the citizens actually settle? So where did the Roman DNA go? And how much still lives in modern Italians? We searched the provinces for traces of Rome and found ghosts. But here, in the land where it all began, the bones still whisper. Not in Latin, but in code, in chromosomes, in stories written in blood. Today's Italians aren't pure Romans. They're the sum of every empire, invasion, and whisper in the bones. Walk the streets of modern Italy, from the olive groves of Apulia to the wine hills of Piedmont, and you won't find the Roman race from history books. You'll find something far older and far more complex. Because when scientists opened the genome of modern Italians, they didn't find a single ancestral thread. They found a tapestry, stitched by conquest, migration, survival. R1b, the old Indo-European Y-DNA, still echoes in 26% of men, especially in the north where Iron Age italics once ruled. But head south and the picture shifts. J2 rises to 25%, along with E1b1b, both lineages that tell stories of Greek colonies, Phoenician traders, and Near Eastern flows. In Sicily and Calabria, that DNA sings louder, tied to centuries of Mediterranean exchange. On the maternal side, the gradients are just as dramatic. Haplogroup H, dominant in Europe, covers 59% in the north, but only 33% in the south. And buried deep, around 1%, are lineages like M1, U6, and L, rare traces of North African and sub-Saharan ancestry, likely carried by ancient sea routes, slavery, or trade. This isn't a single story. It's a library. It's a land where no one is fully Roman, yet everyone carries Rome in fragments, a legacy not of blood purity, but of survival, evolution, and collision. So when we speak of Italian DNA, we're not pointing to a tribe. We're opening a vault and hearing echoes from Anatolia, Germania, Carthage, Greece, Judea, and yes, even from the hills of Latium. And yet, in all this data, all these lineages, one thing remains. The myths we grew up with. The tales of noble founders, of Trojans crossing seas, of Etruscans from the east, and Rome born from divine lineage. But what about the myths we were taught, like Troy, Etruscans from the east, and Rome's genetic glory? We've unraveled centuries of DNA. We've traced the threads of conquest and migration. Now what about the stories built into our bones, those legends passed from a hero's mouth to a nation's heart, from Aeneas to eternal bloodlines? Roman myths are falling one by one. We grew up hearing that Rome began with a Trojan survivor, that the Etruscans drifted from Anatolia, that we carry the blood of Caesars in modern veins. But DNA doesn't lie, even when legends do. Herodotus told a powerful story. The Etruscans, the proud builders of temples and tombs, came from Lydia, across the Aegean. But the bones tell another tale. Ancient DNA from Tarquinia, 9th to 7th century BCE, showed they were not migrants at all. Their lineage is pure Italian, indigenous, rooted, and unmatched by any Anatolian echo. Then there's Aeneas, supposedly the Trojan prince who fled Troy and founded Rome, a beautiful myth. But when explorers of genomes looked for Anatolian markers in Roman remains, they found none. None. The story that Rome descended from Trojan blood is a story, not science. And what about the famous Pompeii sisters, the figures caught in a tragic embrace under ash? A 2024 genome analysis flipped that myth upside down. They weren't sisters. They weren't even related. One was a woman from the Eastern, Mediterranean, the other a man from North Africa. Strangers bound together only in death. Legends reach farther. People say modern Romanians are Roman descendants, maybe. But when genetic studies arrived in Bucharest, they found that Romanians are mostly Dacian, Slavic, and Balkan. The Roman Empire left language and faith, but no consistent bloodline. Today, science tells us older, stranger, richer truths. It says Rome was not born from myth, but from millions of migrations and moments. Truths buried in graves, not carved in stone. Soon we'll follow one story frozen, not in legend, but in ash. One place that captured the world's diversity in a single volcanic heartbeat. But there's one grave, one city, that preserved the empire's true diversity in a single moment. That place wasn't a myth. It wasn't written in stone. It was buried beneath layers of ash, waiting until science ripped the silence open. What if that city wasn't just a memory but a genetic time capsule, sealed by catastrophe and cracked open centuries later? In one volcanic heartbeat, Rome's entire DNA mosaic was entombed and rediscovered by science in 2024. When Vesuvius erupted in August 79 CE, Pompeii froze, sleeping but unbroken. And now, in 2024, science woke it, not with chisels or excavation, but with DNA extracted from bones that witnessed death and were reborn as revelation. Pompeii was never a provincial backwater. The city thrummed with life, powered by traders from Anatolia, artisans from the Levant, even laborers from North Africa. The House of the Golden Bracelet wasn't a patrician Roman shrine. It was a crossroads of bloodlines. Inside that house, a woman was long thought a local matron. Instead, her genome whispered of Syria. The figure next to her, presumed kin, was not family but a North African stranger, frozen in the clasp of shared fate, not shared origin. These weren't just remains. These were stories paused in mid-sentence. Pompeii's ovens turned homes to ash, but they also preserved human complexity, the tangled web of ancestry woven into its streets. This wasn't a myth. It was DNA. The city's ruins are silent, but its people speak, in alleles, in haplogroups, in fragments of identity buried beneath centuries of dust. Every shattered fresco, every cast of a tortured body, now has a genetic echo that defies expectation. So if Rome's great mosaic survived in Pompeii, what other genetic secrets might slumber, waiting to be unearthed in forgotten villages, old family crypts, even beneath our very feet? If Pompeii looked like this, what secrets still sleep under rural Italian soil? But Pompeii wasn't alone. It was just one chapter in a much larger book, a book whose missing pages are still buried, not beneath marble, but beneath the wheat fields and shepherd paths of the Roman countryside. We've mapped Rome, Pompeii, and the cities, but the fields still whisper secrets. The spotlight has lingered on cities, grand ruins, imperial mosaics, and volcanic tombs. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place all along? Rome's countryside, the real Rome where the Republic once breathed, remains largely silent. Lazio's farmlands, Calabria's hills, Tuscany's forests, these places built the empire's backbone, but they've barely been touched by archaeogenetics. Only a handful of samples exist from these rural regions, and yet they're already speaking. Studies in Tuscany and Basilicata reveal astonishing continuity. Iron Age genetic profiles preserved through conquests, empires, and collapse. Umbria's mtDNA echoes Bronze Age lineages still present in modern villagers. And it's not just local survival, it's forgotten complexity. Apulia's genetic blend shows patterns from the Eastern Mediterranean, hints of ancient Greek settlers, or even pre-Roman migrations no one recorded. These aren't fringe cases, these are clues to a hidden Rome. Cities like Pompeii show diversity, yes, but villages, they show memory. Not just who arrived, but who stayed. Not just who conquered, but who endured. And yet most genetic studies ignore them. The villages, the builders, the mothers and children who weren't emperors, but who passed down genes with every breath. These are the unsung bloodlines of the empire. But now, science is listening differently. A new wave of ultra-sensitive ancient DNA extraction, just developed in 2024, promises to access degraded genomes from low-status rural graves, once thought impossible to read. And suddenly the forgotten may speak louder than the remembered. And a new technique, just developed, may be the final key to unlock it all. That key is here. It doesn't come in a vial. No, it comes in code and algorithms. Ready to pull back the curtain on history one generation at a time. A revolutionary method is now exposing genetic details 10 times sharper than ever before. Imagine reading history not in leagues, but in heartbeats. A scientist looks at a bone and sees not just a person, but their entire journey. That power now exists. It's called TwigStats, unveiled in 2025 by researchers at the Francis Crick Institute and published in Nature. Traditional DNA tools rely on snapshots, SNPs, broad strokes, pixelated maps of ancestry. But TwigStats, it reconstructs genealogical trees, traces rare variants, and filters signals by time, so we can detect migrations as recent as a few generations ago. Applied to 1st–5th century Roman-era genomes, this technique is already rewriting entire migration maps. It can detect individuals moving from North Africa to Britain, or from Anatolia to Pompeii, and distinguish a soldier, a slave, a trader, sometimes by a single inherited allele. This isn't speculation, it's surgical clarity. The past has layers. TwigStats peels them back, one coalescent node at a time. It separates whispers of migration from noise. It distinguishes ancient continuity from sudden arrivals. It tells us if that DNA belongs to a traveler or a native who quietly carried on. This is not just science, it's a revelation. We're not just mapping ancestry, we're turning bones into biographies. It is the most powerful forensic lens the genetic age has ever seen, and it's already begun to redraw what we thought was settled history. What will it show us about one resilient lineage? The thread tying Etruscan, Roman, Lombard, and Venetian history together across 3,000 years. And next, we follow one lineage, one Y chromosome, across 3,000 years of empire. From that single chromosome, we'll trace a story, not of empires or conquests, but of a lineage that endured, weaving through every chapter of Italian history. One bloodline passed through Etruscans, Romans, Lombards, and lives on today. It starts with a whisper, buried deep in ancient clay, an Iron Age warrior's Y chromosome quietly drilling through time. That same genetic thread survives in the bustling alleys of modern Naples, carried by someone whose name we won't ever know. This is the story of two powerful lineages, R1b M269, a Bronze Age marker of steppe warriors, and J2 M172, a signature of Mediterranean sailors and farmers. These haplogroups were not accidental passengers, they were storytellers. Archaeologists dug into Iron Age tombs across Tuscany and Lazio, extracting fragments of male lineage. Each genome, as broken as it was, whispered the same names. Centuries later, modern samples from Naples carry identical sequences. Whole portions of that DNA traveled through familial lines, surviving the Etruscan reign, the Roman Republic, barbarian incursions, the rise of medieval kingdoms. This lineage didn't perish with the fall of the empire, it endured. Through plague, famine, invasions by Ostrogoths, Lombards, Normans, through the Renaissance, wars, and reunifications. Maybe being Roman wasn't about blood, it was about belonging to something larger, something that refused to die. Imagine that, DNA outlasting the legions that once claimed victory over the world, a skeletal echo of continuity, unbroken, unbowed. You're not just looking at history on a map, you're tracing a heartbeat that keeps pulsing. In every handshake, every embrace, every whispered, "I'm from here," that line, etched into the bones of strangers, still carries its weight. Because in the end, the empire fell, but its people never stopped moving.